In that closed, sequestered town of Plassans, where class distinction was so clearly marked in 1848, the commotion caused by political events was very slight. Even at the present day, the popular voice sounds very faintly there. The middle classes bring their prudence to bear in the matter, the nobility their mute despair, and the clergy their shrewd cunning. Kings may usurp thrones, or republics may be established, without scarcely any stir in the town. Plassans sleeps while Paris fights. But though on the surface the town may appear calm and indifferent, in the depths hidden work goes on which it is curious to study. If shots are rare in the streets, intrigues consume the drawing rooms of both the New Town and the Saint-Marc quarter. Until the year 1830, the masses were reckoned of no account. Even at the present time, they are similarly ignored. Everything is settled between the clergy, the nobility, and the bourgeoisie. The priests, who are very numerous, give the cue to the local politics. They lay subterranean mines, as it were, and deal blows in the dark, following a prudent tactical system, which hardly allows of a step in advance or retreat even in the course of 10 years. The secret intrigues of men who desire above all things to avoid noise requires special shrewdness, a special aptitude for dealing with small matters, and a patient endurance such as one only finds in persons callous to all passions. It is thus that provincial dilatoriness, which is so freely ridiculed in Paris, is full of treachery, secret stabs, hidden victories and defeats. These worthy men, particularly when their interests are at stake, kill at home with a snap of the fingers, as we, the Parisians, kill with cannon in the public thoroughfares. The political history of Plassans, like that of all little towns in Provence, is singularly characteristic. Until 1830, the inhabitants remained observant Catholics and fervent Royalists. Even the lower classes only swore by God and their legitimate sovereigns. Then there came a sudden change. Faith departed, the working and middle classes deserted the cause of legitimacy, and gradually espoused the great democratic movement of our time. When the Revolution of 1848 broke out, the nobility and the clergy were left alone to labour for the triumph of Henri V. For a long time they had regarded the accession of the Orleanists as a ridiculous experiment, which sooner or later would bring back the Bourbons. Although their hopes were singularly shaken, they nevertheless continued the struggle, scandalized by the defection of their former allies, whom they strove to win back to their cause. The Saint-Marc quarter, assisted by all the parish priests, set to work. Among the middle classes, and especially among the people, the enthusiasm was very great on the morrow of the events of February. These apprentice republicans were in haste to display their revolutionary fervour. As regards the gentry of the new town, however, the conflagration, bright though it was, lasted no longer than a fire of straw. The small house owners and retired tradespeople who had had their good days, or had made snug little fortunes under the monarchy, were soon seized with panic. The Republic, with its constant shocks and convulsions, made them tremble for their money and their life of selfishness. Consequently, when the clerical reaction of 1849 declared itself, nearly all the middle classes passed over to the Conservative Party. They were received with open arms. The new town had never before had such close relations with the Saint-Marc quarter. Some of the nobility even went so far as to shake hands with the lawyers and retired oil dealers. This unexpected familiarity kindled the enthusiasm of the new quarter, which henceforward waged bitter warfare against the Republican government. To bring about such a coalition, the clergy had to display marvellous skill and endurance. The nobility of Plassans for the most part lay prostrate, as if half dead. They retained their faith, but lethargy had fallen on them, and they preferred to remain inactive, allowing the heavens to work their will. They would gladly have contented themselves with silent protest, feeling, perhaps, a vague presentiment that their divinities were dead, and that there was nothing left for them to do but rejoin them. Even at this period of confusion, when the catastrophe of 1848 was calculated to give them a momentary hope of the return of the Bourbons, they showed themselves spiritless and indifferent, speaking of rushing into the mêlée, yet never quitting their hearths without a pang of regret. The clergy battled indefatigably against this feeling of impotence and resignation. They infused a kind of passion into their work. A priest, when he despairs, struggles all the more fiercely. The fundamental policy of the Church is to march straight forward. Even though she may have to postpone the accomplishment of her projects for several centuries, she never wastes a single hour, but is always pushing forward with increasing energy. So it was the clergy who led the reaction of Plassans. The nobility only lent them their name, nothing more. The priests hid themselves behind the nobles, restrained them, directed them, and even succeeded in endowing them with a semblance of life. When they had induced them to overcome their repugnance so far as to make common cause with the middle classes, they believed themselves certain of victory. The ground was marvellously well prepared. This ancient royalist town, with its population of peaceful householders and timorous tradespeople, was destined to range itself, sooner or later, on the side of law and order. The clergy, by their tactics, hastened the conversion. After gaining the landlords of the new town to their side, they even succeeded in convincing the little retail dealers of the old quarter. From that time, the reactionary movement obtained complete possession of the town. All opinions were represented in this reaction. Such a mixture of embittered liberals, legitimists, Orleanists, Bonapartists, and clericals had never before been seen. It mattered little, however, at that time. The sole object was to kill the Republic, and the Republic was at the point of death. Only a fraction of the people, 1,000 workmen at most, out of the 10,000 souls in the town, still saluted the tree of liberty planted in the middle of the square in front of the sub-prefecture. The shrewdest politicians of Plassans, those who led the reactionary movement, did not scent the approach of the Empire until very much later. Prince Louis Napoleon's popularity seemed to them a mere passing fancy of the multitude. His person inspired them with but little admiration. They reckoned him a nonentity, a dreamer, incapable of laying his hands on France, and especially of maintaining his authority. To them he was only a tool whom they would make use of, who would clear the way for them, and whom they would turn out as soon as the hour arrived for the rightful pretender to show himself. However, months went by, and they became uneasy. It was only then that they vaguely perceived they were being duped. They had no time, however, to take any steps. The coup d'etat burst over their heads, and they were compelled to applaud. That great abomination, the Republic, had been assassinated. That, at least, was some sort of triumph. So the clergy and the nobility accepted accomplished facts with resignation, postponing until later the realization of their hopes, and making amends for their miscalculations by uniting with the Bonapartists for the purpose of crushing the last Republicans. It was these events that laid the foundation of the Rougons' fortune. After being mixed up with the various phases of the crisis, they rose to eminence on the ruins of liberty. These bandits had been lying in wait to rob the Republic. As soon as it had been strangled, they helped to plunder it. After the events of February 1848, Félicité, who had the keenest scent of all the members of the family, perceived that they were at last on the right track. So she began to flutter round her husband, goading him on to bestir himself. The first rumours of the revolution that had overturned King Louis-Philippe had terrified Pierre. When his wife, however, made him understand that they had little to lose and much to gain from a convulsion, he soon came round to her way of thinking. "I don't know what you can do," Félicité repeatedly said, "but it seems to me that there's plenty to be done. Did not Monsieur de Carnavant say to us one day that he would be rich if ever Henri V should return, and that this sovereign would magnificently recompense those who had worked for his restoration? Perhaps our fortune lies in that direction. We may yet be lucky." The Marquis de Carnavant, the nobleman who, according to the scandalous talk of the town, had been on very familiar terms with Félicité's mother, used occasionally to visit the Rougons. Evil Evil tongues asserted that Madame Rougon resembled him. He was a little, lean, active man, 75 years old at that time, and Félicité certainly appeared to be taking his features and manner as she grew older. It was said that the wreck of his fortune, which had already been greatly diminished by his father at the time of the emigration, had been squandered on women. Indeed, he cheerfully acknowledged his poverty. Brought up by one of his relatives, the Count de Valqueyras, he lived the life of a parasite, eating at the Count's table and occupying a small apartment just under his roof. "Little one," he would often say to Félicité as he patted her on the cheek, "if ever Henri V gives me a fortune, I will make you my heiress." He still called Félicité Little One, even when she was 50 years old. It was of these friendly pats, of these repeated promises of an inheritance, that Madame Rougon was thinking when she endeavoured to drive her husband into politics. Monsieur de Carnavant had often bitterly lamented his inability to render her any assistance. No doubt he would treat her like a father if ever he should acquire some influence. Pierre, to whom his wife half explained the situation in veiled terms, declared his readiness to move in any direction indicated. The Marquis's peculiar position qualified him to act as an energetic agent of the reactionary movement at Plassans from the first days of the Republic. This bustling little man, who had everything to gain from the return of his legitimate sovereigns, worked assiduously for their cause. While the wealthy nobility of the Saint-Marc quarter were slumbering in mute despair, fearing, perhaps, that they might compromise themselves and again be condemned to exile, he multiplied himself, as it were, spread the propaganda, and rallied faithful ones together. He was a weapon whose hilt was held by an invisible hand. From that time forward he paid daily visits to the Rougons. He required a centre of operations. His relative, Monsieur de Valqueyras, had forbidden him to bring any of his associates into his house, so he had chosen Félicité's yellow drawing room. Moreover, he very soon found Pierre a valuable assistant. He could not go himself and preach the cause of legitimacy to the petty traders and workmen of the old quarter. They would have hooted him. Pierre, on the other hand, who had lived among these people, spoke their language and knew their wants, was able to catechize them in a friendly way. He thus became an indispensable man. In less than a fortnight, the Rougons were more determined royalists than the king himself. The Marquis, perceiving Pierre's zeal, shrewdly sheltered himself behind him. What was the use of making himself conspicuous, when a man with such broad shoulders was willing to bear on them the burden of all the follies of a party? He allowed Pierre to reign, puff himself out with importance and speak with authority, content to restrain or urge him on, according to the necessities of the cause. Thus the old oil dealer soon became a personage of mark. In the evening, when they were alone, Félicité used to say to him, "Go on, don't be frightened, we're on the right track. If this continues, we shall be rich. We shall have a drawing room like the tax receivers and be able to entertain people." A little party of conservatives had already been formed at the Rougons' house, and meetings were held every evening in the yellow drawing room to declaim against the Republic. Among those who came were 3 or 4 retired merchants who trembled for their money and clamoured with all their might for a wise and strong government. An old almond dealer, a member of the municipal council, Monsieur Isidore Granou, was the head of this group. His hare-lipped mouth was cloven a little way from the nose. His round eyes, his air of mingled satisfaction and astonishment, made him resemble a fat goose whose digestion is attended by wholesome terror of the cook. He spoke little, having no command of words, and he only pricked up his ears when anyone accused the Republicans of wishing to pillage the houses of the rich, whereupon he would colour up to such a degree as to make one fear an approaching apoplectic fit, and mutter low imprecations in which the words idlers, scoundrels, thieves, and assassins frequently recurred. All those who frequented the yellow drawing room were not, however, as heavy as this fat goose. A rich landowner, Monsieur Roudier, with a plump, insinuating face, used to discourse there for hours altogether, with all the passion of an Orleanist whose calculations had been upset by the fall of Louis Philippe. He had formerly been a hosier at Paris, and a purveyor to the court, but had now retired to Plassans. He had made his son a magistrate, relying on the Orleanist party to promote him to the highest dignities. The revolution having ruined all his hopes, he had rushed wildly into the reaction. His fortune, his former commercial relations with the Tuileries, which he transformed into friendly intercourse, that prestige which is enjoyed by every man in the provinces who has made his money in Paris and deigns to come and spend it in a faraway department, gave him great influence in the district. Some persons listened to him as though he were an oracle. However, the strongest intellect of the Yellow Drawing Room was certainly Commander Sicardot, Aristide's father-in-law. Of Herculean frame, with a brick-red face, scarred and planted with tufts of grey hair, he was one of the most glorious old dolts of the Grande Armée. During the February Revolution he had been exasperated with the street warfare and never wearied of referring to it, proclaiming with indignation that this kind of fighting was shameful, whereupon he recalled with pride the grand reign of Napoleon. Another person seen at the Rougons' house was an individual with clammy hands and equivocal look, one Monsieur Vuillet, a bookseller, who supplied all the devout ladies of the town with holy images and rosaries. Vuillet dealt in both classical and religious works. He was a strict Catholic, a circumstance which ensured him the custom of the numerous convents and parish churches. Further, by a stroke of genius, he had added to his business the publication of a little bi-weekly journal, the Gazette de Plassans, which was devoted exclusively to the interests of the clergy. This paper involved an annual loss of 1,000 francs, but it made him the champion of the church and enabled him to dispose of his sacred unsaleable stock. Though he was virtually illiterate and could not even spell correctly, he himself wrote the articles of the Gazette with a humility and rancour that compensated for his lack of talent. The Marquis, in entering on the campaign, had perceived immediately the advantage that might be derived from the cooperation of this insipid sacristan with the coarse, mercenary pen. After the February Revolution, the articles in the Gazette contained fewer mistakes. The Marquis revised them. One can now imagine what a singular spectacle the Rougons' Yellow Drawing Room presented every evening. All opinions met there to bark at the Republic. Their hatred of that institution made them agree together. The Marquis, who never missed a meeting, appeased by his presence the little squabbles which occasionally arose between the commander and the other adherents. These plebeians were inwardly flattered by the handshakes which he distributed on his arrival and departure. Roudier, however, like a freethinker of the Rue Saint-Honoré, asserted that the Marquis had not a copper to bless himself with, and was disposed to make light of him. Monsieur de Carnavant, on his side, preserved the amiable smile of a nobleman lowering himself to the level of these middle-class people, without making any of those contemptuous grimaces which any other resident of the Saint-Marc quarter would have thought fit under such circumstances. The parasite life he had led had rendered him supple. He was the life and soul of the group, commanding in the name of unknown personages whom he never revealed. "They want this, they don't want that," he would say. The concealed divinities who thus watched over the destinies of Plassans from behind some cloud, without appearing to interfere directly in public matters, must have been certain priests, the great political agents of the country. When the Marquis pronounced that mysterious word, "they," which inspired the assembly with such marvellous respect, Vuillet confessed, with a gesture of pious devotion, that he knew them very well. The happiest person in all this was Félicité. At last she had people coming to her drawing room. It was true she felt a little ashamed of her old yellow velvet furniture. She consoled herself, however, thinking of the rich things she would purchase when the good cause should have triumphed. The Rougons had, in the end, regarded their royalism as very serious. Félicité went as far as to say, when Roudier was not present, that if they had not made a fortune in the oil business, the fault lay in the monarchy of July. This was her mode of giving a political tinge to their poverty. She had a friendly word for everybody, even for Granoux, inventing each evening some new polite method of waking him up when it was time for departure. The drawing room, that little band of conservatives belonging to all parties, and daily increasing in numbers, soon wielded powerful influence. Owing to the diversified characters of its members, and especially to the secret impulse which each one received from the clergy, it became the centre of the reactionary movement and spread its influence throughout Plassans. The policy of the Marquis, who sank his own personality, transformed Rougon into the leader of the party.